In this unit, you will learn how territory is organized at different scales from local to global. What that means is that people over time have had significantly different ideas about how Earth's surface should be organized and how power should be distributed within the territories, or the space within boundaries, whether they are informal or formal, like today's political map. One major theme in this unit is the relationship between countries, whether it's a beneficial one like trade agreements or provocative ones like the relationship between the United States and the Soviet Union during the Cold War. The other main topic in this unit is the modern state. What is a state? What is a nation? What is the difference between the two, and why does it matter? The contemporary world map is shaped by forces like devolution, borders and walls, internal boundaries, and the rise of supranational organizations. The effects of colonialization and imperialism still play a major role in today's political structure. We will look at forces that bring states together, like a shared sense of culture, or forces that push them apart, like ethnic disputes. Finally, we will take a look at the role of terrorism in today's changing world. One of the most pressing topics in the news today is the human struggle occurring in and around Syria. The civil war there began after the Arab Spring of the early 2000s, but the roots of this conflict have been growing in the region for much longer. We have with us again today Dr. David Oualaalou, an international security lecturer, regular contributor to Huffington Post, and author of The Ambiguous Foreign Policy of the United States Towards the Muslim World, More Than a Handshake, and the forthcoming book, Volatile State, Iran and the Nuclear Age. Welcome, Dr. Oualaalou.
Thanks for having me.
Can you talk about how the borders in the Middle East have changed over time and how those changes have contributed to the current geopolitical status of the Middle East?
Certainly. Well, as the 2007 unfolds, the Middle East continues to implode, and with each new event, it suggests greater threats to its people. Syria is ravaged by a civil war that no one knows the outcome of. Iraq is marred by sectarian violence. Yemen is a failed state. Then add to that the security and political instability in Iraq, and also the tensions now between Saudi Arabia and Iran. And what you have basically is a volatile stew of conflicting passions and ideologies. But before we move forward, we need to understand what are the reasons and the causes that led to this turmoil in the Middle East. The first thing that comes to mind is the secret agreement of the Sykes-Picot of 1916. When the borders were drawn back then, only they didn't realize that it will have an impact on today. Well, just a brief notion about the Sykes-Picot. That was a secret agreement that was made between France and Britain. Mark Sykes represented the British government, and François Picot represented the French government. The negotiations for that agreement were conducted secretly, first of all, between November 1915 and March 1916. And in May 26th, 1916, the agreement was signed. And the deal was, as we see on the map here, the deal was that the A part will be given to the France, will be under the control of France, and the B part will be under the control of Britain. And this is why, till today, you still see, for example, in Lebanon, people speak French over there. Yeah. And the deal was, as the Sykes-Picot agreement highlighted back then, that Lebanon will be under the control of France, which will be also a haven for Christians at the time, the Maronites and the Druze. On the other hand, you get the Palestinian territory, which was at the time around the Bekaa Valley, which with the main population of Jewish people. Then you have also the Bekaa Valley, which was given to a land between the two rivers, was given to the Shia. And also you have now the sectarian Sunni Muslims, mainly in Syria. So what we see in today in the Middle East is a reflection of that secret agreement that Sykes and Picot made without taking into consideration certain aspects. There are three major points that I'd like to highlight as to the outcome of this agreement. The tribal lines, which means borders. If you look at on the Middle East now, with all the countries where they are, there's always those made-up borders, but those borders are made up without the context of the tribal mindset on it. So when the SAIC and PICAC made those borders, they did not take into consideration the impact of the tribal mentality, and that's how the Middle East is. And the third problem has to do with the emergence of nationalism. And that's what emerged in the 50s with Jamal Abdel Nasser in Egypt, followed by Syria, Hafid al-Assad, followed by Muammar Gaddafi in Libya, and followed also by Saddam Hussein in Iraq. So you take that into consideration with the younger generation now, where the younger generation has sort of reacted to that agreement. Your best example for it is the Arab Spring of 2011. So the Arab Spring was not about democracy. The Arab Spring was about social injustice. Because with the population, as a matter of fact, if you look at just the last 2 or 3, actually the last 4 decades, the population in the Arab world has increased dramatically to about 330 million people. And the interesting aspect is, out of the 330 million, 2/3, which is about 220, are under the age of 35. Now, check this out. The age of 35 with nothing to do, unemployed. That's a recipe for terrorism recruitment. And that's exactly the source, because the source of the problems and part of the conflicts in the Middle East. Because you get lack of economic opportunities, failed education system. You know, the resources of the countries are only controlled by the few. And you add to that also the notion, a defeatist attitude towards the future. And you take all that into consideration to see how the SAIC-PICAC agreement that was done a century ago still impacts the Middle East till today.
Thank you, Dr. Oualaalou.
My pleasure.
Students, you will learn a lot more about these complex and important topics in Unit 4. And overall, what we really want you to do is to learn to think about these issues. There's no easy solutions, but the more we educate ourselves on the issues, the root causes, and the geopolitical and geographic perspective, the better we are to make the world a much better place.